As a scientist, I think it's really important that we try to increase the accessibility of scientific knowledge for the everyday person. Um, I sort of started on this path when I took a course in undergrad that was specifically focusing on scientific literature and trying to write that in layman's terms. I'm just going to read a summary that I made that sort of talks about the results of this study, reducing false positive screening MRI rates in women with extremely dense breasts using prediction models based on data from the DENSE trial. This came out in 2021. Cancer screening is arguably one of the most important tools in reducing cancer mortality rates, as early detection leads to a better prognosis. Individuals with high density breasts tend to have reduced sensitivity in mammogram screenings stemming from fibroglandular tissues obscuring tumors. This creates problems for patients with dense breasts, especially since they are twice as likely to get breast cancer than normal density breasts. Because of these issues, scientists look for a better screening method for dense breasts, and MRI screening is shown to be the most sensitive detection method in this case, but this also means the specificity of the technique is reduced, meaning there will be less false negatives but more false positives. Reducing the proportion of false positives in screening not only lessens patients' anxiety, but also minimizes the amount of costly and invasive procedures, such as breast biopsies and additional screening. That is especially important today as the COVID-19 pandemic, which was occurring at the time that I wrote this, and I guess is still occurring, but just to a lesser extent, has limited patients' willingness to go to the doctors, whether for safety concerns or financial difficulties. To achieve this goal, a publication from the journal Radiological Society of North America utilized data from the DENSE, which is dense tissue and early breast neoplastic screening, trial to create a predictive model that reduced false positives in MRI breast cancer screening. Patient history, cancer risk factors, clinical data, and MRI results were analyzed to create several predictive models. Each model works by detecting patterns in the included variables. For example, individuals who are true positives tended to be older, have family history of breast cancer, be higher BI-RADS classification, have rapid contrast uptake, and have masses with irregular shapes and borders. This means models look at the specific data from each patient to determine if a positive result fell within the true positive range and were thus considered a true positive. One model accounted for all clinical characteristics and MRI findings. The second reduced variable numbers in clinical and MRI findings so that the goodness of fit and simplicity of the model was optimized. And the third accounted for only patient age and MRI findings. The pros and cons of each model were weighed against each other to ensure that obtaining the information needed for the model would be practical in a clinical setting. This process allowed researchers to create a value in each model for the number of false positives needed so that no cancer was missed in screenings. The prediction model with all variables included reduced false positive rate by 45.5% without including any false negatives. And this was from 264 to 144 patients in this DENSE trial. When goodness of fit and minimum number of variables were optimized, the model reduced the number of false positives by 32.2%, which made the number of false positives in the trial drop from 264 to 179. Finally, the model that only included MRI findings and age reduced false positive numbers by 35.5% from 301 to 194 patients. Although the model with the greatest amount of information reduced the false positive rates by 45.5%, the amount of time and money needed to collect this patient data is not always practical outside of clinical trials. This makes the model, including only MRI findings and age, much better for the typical patient, and there's only a 10.5% difference in the reduction rates, so it is still an improvement over the current system. While researchers say that the study is probably over-optimistic since data used in creating the regression model was tested with said model, it is important to note that the large improvement in dense breast cancer screening specifically and accuracy over the typical mammogram. Because of this limitation, plans are being made to validate this model in additional patient populations with the hopes of confirming these results. The scientists also noticed that they hope to use this model for additional screening after the first MRI to reduce the false positive rates here too. It's important to note that these findings will further widen the health gap between lower and upper class patients, as accurate and precise testing is dependent on insurance and income. From personal experience, as someone with a good health insurance plan and chronic disabilities, I know I am often not approved for expensive tests such as MRIs and CAT scans, even when a doctor has deemed it necessary. It often takes weeks of calling my insurance company to finally get approved, and not everyone has the ability to take time off of work to do so. The difference in cost between mammograms and MRI screening is immense, so many people will be unable to afford this type of testing. This could be the deciding factor in whether a patient survives or not, as early detection lessens the mortality rate. On average, the typical mammogram costs from $100 to $250, and the U.S. cost of a mammogram is required to be covered by all insurance. Since MRI testing is still new for breast cancer screening, this technique is not required to be covered by insurance, and the patient's out-of-pocket cost could increase from a range of $400 to $13,000 for just one test. This cost increases if additional imaging is required. Although these models provide hope for future cancer screening and highlight the importance of predictive models in clinical settings, they also call attention to healthcare disparities in the U.S. since MRI testing is more expensive than mammograms. Legal and insurance policies need to be adjusted to reflect this study's findings so all patients can have access to specific and accurate testing. I think it's really important that this knowledge is made public in a way that everyone can understand, and I hope to do this with future papers and publications that come out, as well as any publications that I write as I do my PhD journey. And I just think this is super important, and I think it should be more common for scientists to do, because even from one scientific topic to another, the terms are super niche and make it pretty hard for scientists even to read papers in a different field. So it must be impossible for just people without scientific knowledge to do so. Thanks, and recommend any papers if you want me to try to put those in layman's terms.